Old man was short on cash for medicine. What John did next stunned the pharmacist. New York City, 1972. Greenwich Village, a labyrinth of cobblestone streets and quiet desperation, where the dreams of artists and the struggles of the forgotten existed side by side, separated by nothing more than a thin, cruel wall of circumstance. What if, on a gray winter afternoon, John Lennon walked into a small neighborhood pharmacy and witnessed a moment of quiet, devastating human suffering so profound that what he did next stunned everyone in that store and exposed a disturbing truth about the invisible war being fought in the shadow of every glittering American city. The year is 1972. New York City, a colossus of steel and ambition, was a city of furious contradictions. On one side of its gleaming facade, the wealthy moved through their days insulated from consequence, their problems measured in inconveniences rather than catastrophes. On the other side, in the narrow streets and modest neighborhoods that the glossy magazines never photographed, ordinary Americans were waging a daily, grinding battle against a system that had largely forgotten them. Greenwich Village, with its bohemian reputation and its tree-lined streets, occupied an uneasy middle ground. It was a neighborhood of artists and dreamers, yes, but also of elderly residents on fixed incomes, of veterans whose service had been repaid with bureaucratic indifference, of people who had built their lives in this city when it was a different place and now found themselves stranded in a version of it they barely recognized. John Lennon had come to live here, or near enough, seeking precisely the kind of anonymity that Greenwich Village offered, a place where a man in round glasses and a worn jacket could walk the streets without becoming an event. He valued these walks, these hours of solitude in the city's rhythm, more than most people in his life understood. They grounded him. They reminded him that the world was larger and more complex than the sealed, climate-controlled bubble of fame. He had stepped into the pharmacy on this particular afternoon for something mundane. Aspirin, perhaps, or vitamin C. Something ordinary, something that required no appointment, no manager, no carefully arranged public appearance. He wanted the simple, unremarkable experience of being a person in a shop, choosing something from a shelf, paying for it, and leaving. He was wearing his usual winter attire, a long coat, his round glasses, a scarf wound loosely around his neck. He had not shaved that morning. He looked, to anyone who was not paying close attention, like any one of the village's countless artistic residents, slightly disheveled, slightly distracted, carrying the interior weather of a mind that never fully stopped working. He did not know. Pushing open the pharmacy door and stepping into the warm, antiseptic-scented interior, that he was about to witness something that would cut through every layer of armor he had spent a lifetime constructing. He did not know that a man was already standing at the counter, and that what was about to happen to that man would reach into John Lennon and find something that no concert, no interview, no political rally had ever quite managed to locate. He did not know, but he was about to find out. Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I need to give you an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has removed their subscriptions without notice. Just take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content that's coming up. And while you're there, leave that powerful like. That helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. John Lennon. In 1972, he was simultaneously the most recognizable and the most deliberately invisible man in New York City. He had chosen this contradiction with the full awareness of its complexity. The global icon who craved the experience of anonymity, the man who had sung "Imagine" to a world that needed imagining, now walking the winter streets of Greenwich Village, breathing cold air, watching ordinary life unfold around him with the focused attention of a man who understood, instinctively, that ordinary life was where everything real actually happened. The pharmacy was small, the way neighborhood pharmacies in New York are always small. A compressed, slightly chaotic space where the shelves crowd close and the air smells of antiseptic and old paper and the particular warmth of a heated interior on a cold day. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. A small Christmas decoration, slightly crooked, clung to the corner of the front window, its tinsel catching the gray afternoon light from the street. Behind the counter, the pharmacist, a man in his 40s, efficient and brisk in the way of people who have spent years processing transactions rather than people, moved with practiced economy. He had the look of someone who had long since ceased to see the individuals on the other side of his counter as anything more than a series of requirements to be processed and dispatched. John moved through the aisles quietly, his hands in his coat pockets, his eyes moving across the shelves with a browsing attention that was only partly focused on what he was looking for. The other part of his attention, the restless, observant part that never really switched off, was doing what it always did, absorbing the room, reading its textures and tensions, filing everything away in the vast interior archive of a man who turned everything he observed into something else eventually. He was in the vitamin aisle when he heard the voice from the counter. An old man's voice, careful and deliberate, with the particular cadence of someone who has rehearsed what they are about to say, knowing that the saying of it will cost them something. John stopped browsing. He listened, and what he heard reached into him and found the boy from Liverpool, the one who had grown up understanding what it meant to count coins and come up short, the one who had never, regardless of how much money had subsequently flowed through his life, forgotten what that feeling was. The old man's name was Walter Briggs. He was 71 years old, a Korean War veteran, a retired transit worker, a widower of 3 years. He stood at the pharmacy counter in a coat that had been good quality once, his back slightly stooped with age, his hands, large, work-worn hands that had driven New York City buses for 32 years, resting on the counter with a careful stillness that suggested he was using them to steady himself. His prescription was for heart medication. Digitalis. Not a luxury, not a preference, not something that could be deferred to next week or replaced with something cheaper from a different shelf. His medication. The thing that kept his damaged heart beating with something approximating regularity. He had counted out his money at home before leaving. He had been careful, methodical, the way people on fixed incomes are always careful and methodical, because the margin between enough and not enough is too narrow to leave anything to carelessness. He had counted correctly. He had simply not accounted for the price increase that had taken effect that week, unannounced, a matter of supply chain adjustments and pharmaceutical margins that had nothing to do with Walter Briggs and everything to do with why Walter Briggs was now standing at the counter for $75 short, his carefully counted money spread on the counter between himself and a pharmacist who was looking at it with the expression of a man performing a calculation that had only one possible result. "Sir," the pharmacist said, his voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone delivering a decision rather than making one. "I understand the situation, but the price is the price. I can't just give you the medication. If you don't have enough today, you can come back when you do." Walter looked at the money on the counter. He looked at the prescription bottle sitting just on the other side of the pharmacist's side of the counter, close enough to touch if the counter weren't there. He looked at his hands. "I need this medication today," Walter said. His voice was quiet and precise, carrying no drama, no plea for sympathy, only the bare, factual statement of a man who understood his own body and what it required. "My last dose was this morning. Without this, my heart." "Sir," the pharmacist repeated, with a firmness that was not unkind, exactly, but was completely indifferent to the content of what was being said. "I understand, but there's nothing I can do. Store policy." John Lennon, standing in the vitamin aisle 8 feet away, heard every word. He had gone completely still. The box of vitamin C he had been holding was still in his hand, but he was no longer looking at it. He was looking at Walter Briggs's hands on the counter, those large, work-worn hands, spread flat on the surface with their careful stillness, and he was feeling something move through him that was older and deeper than any song he had ever written. He set the vitamin C back on the shelf very carefully, and he walked to the counter. Walter Briggs heard footsteps approach and shifted slightly to make room, assuming another customer wanted to reach the counter. He was already beginning the slow, dignified process of gathering his money back into his wallet, the particular, heartbreaking economy of a proud man accepting a defeat he cannot afford to make a scene about. John stepped up beside him. He did not announce himself. He did not make a gesture of any kind. He simply looked at the prescription bottle on the pharmacist's side of the counter, then at the money Walter was carefully refolding, then at the pharmacist. "How much is he short?" John said. His voice was quiet, conversational, entirely devoid of performance. The pharmacist looked up. There was the usual fraction of a second delay. The moment of recognition that John had learned to read in people's faces the way a weather forecaster reads clouds, followed by the subtle shift in the pharmacist's expression that always came with recognition. The slight widening of the eyes. The recalibration. "Mr. Lennon," the pharmacist began. "How much is he short?" John repeated. The same quiet tone. The same absence of drama. Just the question, asked again, requiring an answer. $4.75, the pharmacist said. John reached into his coat pocket. He did not make a production of it. He did not look around to see who was watching, did not turn to the room, did not prepare a statement. He simply reached into his pocket, found a $5 bill, and placed it on the counter beside Walter's carefully gathered money. "Keep the change," John said to the pharmacist. Then he turned to Walter Briggs for the first time and looked at him directly. Not with the careful, managed expression of a celebrity performing an act of charity for an invisible audience. With the direct, unguarded attention of one human being looking at another. Walter Briggs had turned at the sound of John's voice beside him, and now he was looking at a face he recognized with the bewildering, disorienting clarity of seeing someone who belongs to the world of television and newspapers and record covers suddenly, inexplicably standing beside you in a neighborhood pharmacy on a gray Tuesday afternoon. He said nothing. He was too old for the usual fan responses, and too dignified, and too quietly overwhelmed by what had just happened to find words for any of it. "Are you all right?" John asked him, not as a formality, as a question. Walter looked at the prescription bottle, now being slid across the counter by the pharmacist with a speed and willingness that had not been available 60 seconds ago. He looked at the $5 bill. He looked at John. "I'm going to be all right now," Walter said. His voice was steady, but his eyes were not. The pharmacist stood behind his counter in a silence that was different from the silence of efficient transaction processing. This was the silence of a man who has just been made aware, very quietly and without any accusation, of the distance between what he had been doing and what he could have done. He busied himself with the prescription, his movements slightly less mechanical than usual, his eyes not quite meeting anyone else's. Two other customers were in the pharmacy. An elderly woman in the cold remedies aisle, who had turned at the sound of the exchange and now stood motionless among the cough syrups, her selection forgotten in her hand. A young mother with a toddler on her hip, near the back of the store, who had also heard, and who was now watching with the wide, careful eyes of someone witnessing something they want to remember. John had not moved away from the counter. He was still standing beside Walter Briggs, and something in his posture, unhurried, present, without the fidgeting impatience of a man who has completed a task and is ready to move on, suggested that this was not finished yet. He was not simply paying and leaving. He was staying, being there. "What's your name?" John asked Walter. "Walter," the old man said. "Walter Briggs." "John," John said, and offered his hand. Walter shook it with the firm, practiced grip of a man who had worked with his hands his whole life, and something in that handshake, the simple, mutual acknowledgement of two men meeting as equals, seemed to settle something in the room. "You a veteran?" John asked, noticing the small pin on Walter's coat lapel, the Korean War service pin, worn with the unobtrusive pride of a man who considered his service a fact rather than an identity. "Korea," Walter said. 1951 to 1953. John nodded slowly. He looked at the pin for a moment. "My generation," he said quietly. "We were very loud about a lot of things. About war, about peace. We marched and we sang." He paused. "We didn't always remember to pay attention to the men who came before us. The ones who were already home." The room was absolutely still. The fluorescent lights buzzed their faint, continuous note. The gray afternoon pressed against the front window. The pharmacist had stopped moving entirely, the prescription bag in his hands, listening. Walter Briggs looked at John Lennon with the steady, assessing gaze of a man who has spent 71 years developing the ability to tell the difference between what people say and what they mean. He looked for a long time. Then something in his face, something that had been held carefully in place, shifted very slightly. "Most people," Walter said, "walk right past." "I know," John said. "I have too. More than I should have." The elderly woman in the cold remedies aisle set down the item she had been holding and walked to the counter. She opened her purse, counted out $2, and placed them on the counter in front of the pharmacist without explanation. The pharmacist looked at the money, then at her. "What's this for?" he said. "For the next person," she said simply. "For whoever comes in short next time." The young mother at the back of the store shifted her toddler to her other hip, reached into her bag, and added another dollar to the small pile. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The pharmacist stared at the money on his counter, at the $3 and some change that three strangers had quietly placed there, for a person they didn't know who hadn't arrived yet. His expression underwent a slow, visible transformation, not dramatic, not theatrical, but real. The recalibration of a man being shown something about his own counter that he had not previously seen. He reached under the counter and produced a small jar, a simple glass jar, the kind that might have held vitamins once, and placed it beside the register. He put the money in it. He did not say anything. He did not need to. The pharmacy, which had been a place of transactions 60 seconds ago, was now something else entirely. Something harder to name. Something that had to do with the particular, unexpected grace that occasionally descends on ordinary spaces when ordinary people choose, in the same moment, to be better than the situation required. John Lennon stood at the center of it, saying nothing, having done nothing except ask a simple question and produce a $5 bill. Yet the room felt entirely different than it had before he entered it. As if his presence had been a kind of permission for the elderly woman to act on an impulse she might otherwise have suppressed, for the young mother to do the same, for the pharmacist to find a jar. John walked with Walter Briggs for 2 blocks after they left the pharmacy. Not because Walter needed escorting, and not because John had anything particular to say. Simply because the conversation was still happening, still finding its shape, and ending it at the pharmacy door would have felt like cutting something off before it was finished. Walter told him about the transit authority, about 32 years of driving the same routes through the same city, watching it change, watching neighborhoods rise and fall, watching faces he recognized gradually replaced by faces he didn't. He talked about his wife, Eleanor, who had died of a stroke 3 years ago in the apartment they had shared for 41 years, and about the particular, specific silence of an apartment that has held a life and then holds only the memory of one. John listened. He asked questions that were not the questions of a celebrity trying to appear interested, but the questions of a person who was genuinely, fully present in a conversation about someone else's life. He asked about the bus routes, about Korea, about Eleanor, about what Walter did with his mornings now. "I go to the park," Walter said. "Sit on the bench. Watch the pigeons." He paused. "People think that's a sad thing. Old man on a bench with the pigeons." He looked sideways at John. "It's not. Pigeons don't care who you are. They come to you if you've got bread. They don't come to you if you don't. That's honest." John thought about that for a moment. "I spend a lot of time around people whose attention depends on who I am," he said. "Not on whether I've got bread." Walter nodded. "That sounds tiring." "It is," John said. And then, with the slight, genuine smile that appeared rarely and meant more for its rarity, "The pigeons sound better." They parted at the corner. Walter with his prescription bag and his careful, dignified gait, heading back to the apartment that held Eleanor's silence. John standing on the corner for a moment, watching him go, hands back in his coat pockets, the gray afternoon pressing down around him. He did not immediately walk away. He stood on the corner for a while, in the way that people stand when they have just been shown something about the world that has recalibrated something in them, when the recalibration is still settling. Mei Pang, who had been waiting for him at a cafe a block away and who noticed when he finally appeared that something was different in his face, quieter, more inward, the way he looked sometimes after finishing a song that had come from somewhere deep, asked him what happened. "I met a man who drives buses," John said. "Drove buses. For 32 years. He sat down and picked up the coffee that had been waiting for him, now cold. His wife died. He needed medicine. He was $4.75 short. May waited. "I've been $4.75 short," John said quietly. "A long time ago, but I remember what it feels like. The way you count the money twice to make sure, knowing the second count is going to come out the same." He looked out the cafe window at the street. "I forgot that for a while. I think I forget it more than I should." He did not speak of it further that day, but the music he wrote in the weeks that followed carried a new quality of attentiveness, a new willingness to look at the corner rather than the stage, at the face on the bench rather than the face in the crowd. Those who knew him well heard it, even if they couldn't have precisely said what they were hearing. The pharmacy on that Greenwich Village corner is gone now, replaced, as so many small neighborhood businesses have been replaced, by something newer and less particular. The pharmacist retired in 1981. He kept the jar. His daughter, interviewed years later for a small local history project, said that when he died, the jar was still on his windowsill at home, still holding the money that 3 strangers had placed in it one gray Tuesday afternoon in 1972. He had never spent it. He had never added to it. He had simply kept it, she said, as a reminder of something. Walter Briggs lived until 1989. He remained in his apartment in Greenwich Village until the end, going to his park bench most mornings, watching his pigeons, living in the quiet, dignified way of a man who has made his peace with what life has given him and what it has taken away. In his belongings, after his death, his nephew found a small, handwritten note tucked inside his Korean War service record. The note said, in Walter's careful, transit worker handwriting, "A young man helped me today. He didn't make a show of it. He just did it and then stayed and talked. I don't know why that mattered as much as it did, but it did." The note did not name the young man. Walter was that kind of person. The pharmacist's jar, whatever small, unremarked act of institutional grace it represented, is part of a tradition that exists in small pharmacies and corner stores across New York City. A tradition of the small fund kept beside the register for the person who comes up short, for the gap between what someone has and what they need. It has no official name. It requires no foundation, no board of directors, no celebrity endorsement. It exists because, occasionally, a moment occurs in an ordinary place that shows the people in it what they are capable of, and some of them remember. John Lennon was shot and killed on the evening of December 8, 1980, outside his home on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. He was 40 years old. The city that had given him a version of anonymity he could live in. The city whose streets he had walked with his hands in his pockets, absorbing its textures and its contradictions, received the news of his death with a silence that was itself a kind of tribute. The silence of a place that understood it had lost something irreplaceable. But the stories remain. Not the grand ones, not the concert performances and the political statements and the cultural landmarks. The small ones. The corridor in London where a boy played a song. The park bench where a grocery bag was carried home by a stranger. The pharmacy counter where a $5 bill was placed without announcement, without performance, without anything except the quiet, unvarnished recognition of one human being by another. The city breathes. The streets remember. And in the particular silence of a gray winter afternoon, in the antiseptic warmth of a small neighborhood pharmacy, the echo persists. What if the most revolutionary act a person can perform is not the anthem sung to thousands, not the statement made to cameras, not the declaration that changes history, but the moment, quiet and unwitnessed, and unremarkable to everyone except the person who needed it, when a hand reaches into a pocket and produces exactly what the moment requires, and then stays, and asks a question, and listens to the answer?